Our wrap-up speaker for this program has really made his life's work, he and his incredible wife Eleanor, focused on the Quaker potters of Piedmont, North Carolina. Hal Pugh grew up in that area. It's his own ancestry, but it's been his scholarly pursuit for decades. He and Eleanor co-authoring numerous articles on the various potters of the Quaker community of the Central Carolina Piedmont. So, Hal Pugh.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, prior to this week, I did about 3 weeks of research while Eleanor was in the back of the pottery shop, blissfully turning pots. I was out front asking the question of customers, when you think of a Quaker, what is the first image that comes to mind? And here's the results of the survey are these two gentlemen here. On the right, we have the Quaker Oats man. On the left, we have William Penn. So basically, are these individuals representative of the Quaker tradition, of the Quaker dress? Actually, they are. They look very similar to, they're dressed very similar to how you would see Quakers in the 18th and 19th centuries. They wore broad-brimmed hats such as this. They wore blacks, browns, tans, grays, and even dark red clothes. What you have to remember, though, they believed in plainness. They didn't believe in material wealth. Material wealth showed class distinction, reflected class distinction. They shunned fashion, latest fashion. They shunned jewelry. You could be, if you could be left out of the meeting for wearing plaids, for calicos. So basically the women wore bonnets, the men wore these dark hats. They also got into trouble because they would not tip their hats or take their hats off when they went into a building in the presence of other people. They didn't believe in lowering their status. Everybody was equal. Now this will figure in later. Here in North Carolina, this tradition lasted actually until the end of the 19th century. This is Benjamin Beard, the potter's son, William S. Beard. He's standing in front of the Beard's Hat Factory in Guilford County, North Carolina. This picture was taken in 1873, and basically if you see him here, if he puts his hat on, he looks like the Quaker Oats man, or William Penn, 150 years later. So, how is it that these plain Quakers who didn't believe in religious icons, they didn't believe in religious symbolism, they believed in simplicity, how could they make these wares here? That's the question. And I think that's where the problem's been with Quakers. Actually, much research done, because I don't think people actually realize, when they thought of Quakers, they thought of this plainness, and they didn't think about making this type of pottery. Fortunately, in the 1714 Yorkshire Women's Meeting Minutes, we have an answer to this. It says, it's advised that friends should not have so much china or earthenware on their mantelpieces or on their chest of drawers, but rather set them in closets until they have occasion to use them, and likewise to keep from wearing painted calicos. Now basically here I underline so much because so much is a loophole. 300 years ago or yesterday on April the 15th, that's a loophole. And it's that simple. What they're saying is it's up to the individual person to determine how much china is too much. And I think it is actually that simple. There's been dozens of books written about Quakers and their simplicity and why and their material culture, but I think they actually left it up to the individuals in their own homes. You don't see Quakers being disowned for too much china. You see them disowned for wearing painted calicos. Now, the Quakers moved into the Piedmont region from, as others have said, basically the same trails as the Germans. They come in through the Great Wagon Road and the Colonial Trading Path. And they moved into this area of Guilford, Randolph County, and we also had some movement from the eastern part of the state, Yates County. There were actually a group of Quakers over there that come in later. These individuals, there were about 3 waves of when they come into Piedmont, North Carolina. The first wave was the 1750s. They come out of Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland. And then in the second wave in the 1760s, same area. And then in the early 1770s, you had the Beards and the Macy's coming out of Nantucket, New England, that area. As you can see here, there was the largest Quaker settlements was in Randolph and Guilford County and the edge of Alamance County. And all these black dots represent monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, and yearly meetings. There were also smaller meetings than this, satellite meetings. To furnish this group of people, there was a large group of Quakers in this area. Over the 150 years, there were at least, we know of 16 potteries that are mentioned through family accounts and historical accounts. They're marked in blue and red. The 5 red squares represent the 5 potteries that we've found, the 5 sites. So out of 16 possible sites, we've just found 5. So there's a lot to be discovered here. Now, we're going to take the Thomas Dennis family as a representative. I'll move right along on them. Thomas Dennis, they were Irish Quakers, lived in Athlone, Ireland, moved to the United States 1682, moved into Haddonfield, New Jersey, then moved across the Delaware River into Philadelphia, stayed there until about 1720s, then moved to Chester County, Pennsylvania. And from Chester County, they came here in 1766, and the extended family, everybody came. It was a large group that came. It was Thomas Dennis II, Thomas Dennis III, Edward Dennis, all of their families, all their in-laws. And we know they came the Colonial Trading Path because they dropped some in-laws off at the state line at Hillsborough. Problem makers. Now, the Dennises settled on a 300-acre tract of land in northern Randolph County, and they later got a land grant here. And you can see, I don't know if you can see that plain, but you can see the pottery site marked as a dot where it was at. That line, that darker line, is the Colonial Trading Path or Trading Road. So they set right up on the Colonial Trading Road. Great place to be. Now this is, in relationship to Randolph County, this is where the 2 Dennis potteries were located. We know of William Dennis because we know he was a potter because of this apprenticeship indenture of George Newby. George Newby was an African-American youth, lived in western Randolph County. The Newby family in the 1800 census were listed as free blacks, and we now think that they came from Gates County. The Quakers out in Gates County freed their slaves in about the 1770s, 1780s, and William Dennis's wife was Delilah Hobbs, and her sister was married to Samuel Newby. So we think it was through this Newby family where the George Newby probably came from. That makes perfect sense, actually. George was 12 years old, I think, at the time of this in 1813 when he was apprenticed to the pottery trade. The apprenticeship was to last until 1822, and that is, evidently he did last that long. He moved to Indiana. We traced him through Indiana. He could have worked in Richmond as a potter for a while, but there are not any records available. He's later listed in the 1850 census as a blacksmith. And then he moves to Michigan in the 1870 census. He's listed as a farm helper, and we actually think he ended up in Canada. A lot of African Americans after the Civil War did go to Canada. Some of them went on into Canada, and prior to that, they went into Canada. Now, what's nice about a piece of paper like this is it gives substance to the person. Without this apprentice indenture, it would be a guess as to who worked at the Dennis site. You know, we could identify the property from the deeds, but as far as knowing for sure he was a potter, you know, it would be just guesswork. Fortunately, have this apprentice indenture, and with it, we can see we have found a sherd with WM. We know he signed his name like that. And on the far right there is one that's dated 181, and you can't see the last part of the date, so it's 18 in the, after 1810. Now, the earliest pottery or sherds we've seen at the William Dennis site is these sherds here. Now, everything, most of the pieces we've found are small because a lot of these have come out of the plow zone. A lot of them have come out of the kiln. Dr. Linda Carnes McNaughton has done the dig on the kiln. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But these are unusual pieces here. They look like Metropolitan ware for anyone who knows what that is. Here's a piece of Metropolitan ware from Harlow, Essex, England, 1630, 1700. And this seems logical. They were English potters. They would, you know, you would think they would have this type of pottery, have seen this type of pottery. But if you'll notice, there's an unusual tooling on the outer rim there. You have the sharp edge, which is the same. The booge is the same. But if you notice, this is really unusual. Now, this, as a potter, this is the most perplexing thing to me. It drives me crazy, as a matter of fact, because I can see, and I'd like some interaction on this because we got the experts here today. See how they tooled the back of this piece of pottery? There is no reason to do that. Let me just back it up. There is no, as far as turning it as part of the turning process, it's easy to do it with a sponge. So is it decorative, or is it something that was taught, where they were taught from maybe passed down through a tradition? You know, is it traditional? Has anyone ever seen this on the back of a rim like this back lower tooling? I have never seen it. Have you, Linda? Have you ever seen anything like that? I have never seen anything. So this is a good identifier for you collectors, because as far as I know, this is the only place I've ever seen this used. And this could have been William's father. We don't know who else was working at the site other than William's son and George Newby. Now, there are other styles of pottery, sherds that we found at the site decorating, and for the potters here who do decorating, slip decorating, immediately you can see the pieces on the left are more fluid, really gracefully done, just leisurely decorated. The ones on the right are stiff. So that would indicate that it was somebody learning the art of decoration. If you notice, all of them very, very rigid, very stiff. Now, what's interesting about that is actually the turning, the dishes there that are shown in the bowl fragments are extremely well turned. Very thinly turned. They're turned out of this buff clay. Let's see if I can. This piece up here, this bottom fragment, cavetto fragment, is actually 1/8 of an inch thick. So it's very, very thinly turned pottery. But boy, they were lousy decorators. Now, in the patterns that we see at the Dennis site, we see this dot and attenuated teardrop motif. Now, there's somebody out here that does textiles. I heard someone in the audience, if they're still here or not. This design we have seen on samplers in the center here. This is a replicated plate in the center. We've seen this design on some Quaker needlework samplers from England that's very similar to this, but still, this is a very unusual design. Now, keep in mind again that the Quakers didn't use religious symbolism like the Germans. So, now what we do notice, well, we'll get to that in a sec. The petal, another design is this petal-shaped motif, and you'll see this downstairs. And Mary showed how to do this actually here yesterday, with the jeweling around the outer edge. So what's nice here is we can actually, with the archaeology work, we can actually take a sherd from the site and lay it in a similar plate. And here is this petal-shaped motif on 2 plates. On the one plate on the left, you can see where they did the outline and then filled it in. On the right, just the solid line and then the jeweling around it. But you see how the shapes are similar on these 2 pieces. Very well done, very well executed. Now then, something that we've noticed about the Dennis pottery is the designs in the center are symmetrical. I mean, to a point of, you'll see in the next slide here, but they're laid off in equal numbers, 10s, 8s, 4s, and even in this 1812 plate, which looks like it's just 5, if you look, it's actually laid off into 10 parts. Now, the plate on the right is not really well done. It's probably done by somebody learning the trade. It is downstairs. If you haven't taken a look at it, just take a look, because it's kind of representative of somebody learning the trade, or appears to be. Wouldn't you think, Mary?
Yeah, I don't like that one.
Yeah, it is. It's not real pretty at all. It's actually, if you look at it close, you'll see where they actually tried laying a squiggle in it, and then they messed it up about halfway through, and they said, well, we'll just put green slip over it. Nobody will notice, you know. Now, as I've said, the designs in the center of the Dennis plates are symmetrical in the cavetto. And if you look here, you can see how they, and you can compare these to the German plates, and you'll see a difference. They were very straightforward about getting everything lined up, and they're all laid off in even numbers. You see this 4s and then 8s here. So actually it's laid off in 8 parts. Here this one's 10. This one's 10, but not the best in the world. This one's in 4s. And you see this on the Marleys too. Also, you'll notice here how these 3 plates, well, all 4 of them actually, but these 3 in particular, this one, these outer Marley designs are all very similar. Now this plate over here, see, I'm a symmetrical person. So this plate right here drives me crazy because they didn't get it exactly lined up. It must be in the soil there and where we live. Now, probably one of the most interesting pieces that have come out of the Dennis site is this just real small, as Rob says, a tiny piece here of drape molded, marbled, coggle-edged ware. That's a mouthful. And it's the only piece I'm aware of that shows where they were doing this in North Carolina. Is that not correct, Linda? I think it is. No, it is weird. And here's a replication of the plate, and you can see it in comparison to a plate from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, we just recently, and by recently I mean within the last week, we found out another pottery connection here with Philadelphia that we didn't know about. William Dennis's mother was a Webb, and through her family, William Dennis's 3rd cousin was Jesse Kersey. And Jesse Kersey was a potter in Chester County, and he learned from John Thompson in Philadelphia. And Jesse Kersey's also the potter that Richard Mendenhall was sent to Philadelphia to learn from. So there is a connection there. And 3rd cousins, when it comes to Quakers, that's not that far off. Now, in the 1990s, Dr. Linda Carnes McNaughton over here and Tom Hargrave did a magnetometer survey. And since then, Tom Hargrave has passed away, but I'd like to say this about him. He did what, about $6,000 worth of work? And he charged, what we paid him was a bag of turnips. For real, white turnips. And a jitterburger from the local restaurant. So, now what we can do here is, this is a wonderful example, archaeological example of how the kiln can be found by using ground penetrating radar. You can actually see here the outline of the field, the edge of the field. Now, we can, if this works, we can lay this up on edge with the contour and watch this area right here. Right in, let's get this right here. Because as this fades in, you're going to see the actual site, and you'll see that that's where the power line company disturbed some soil. So that shows how accurate these are. Let's see if this works. Yeah, here we go. So you see over here, this is that soil you see disturbed. Now I believe this is Linda and her husband in the background there. And I think Rob showed some of these Three Stooges shovels in his slides, didn't he? That's probably not a good slide to show archaeological work with them. But you actually have to take his top part off. Now what's interesting about this is, if you'll see here, this orange spot, that's the corona from the heat of the kiln. So when we first seen this, we thought, well, it's going to be a round kiln because you got this round circle. Well, it's the heat. Because this is a magnetometer test, and that's what it shows, is the heat, how the soil, the magneticity of the soil is disturbed, from disturbed soil. So actually the blue lines you see, if you can see them, they show the actual squareness of the kiln there. Now here's the lovely Dr. Linda Carnes McNaughton. I have to be nice to her because she does all this for free. She's working on the kiln site here, and if you'll notice, it's a 2-foot thick wall on the kiln, rubble wall, and the inside's got a brick lining to it. The kiln is square in design, 10 by 10, and that would be the firing chamber. This is another view of it. Now, right here in this corner, Linda mentioned yesterday we found this 1774 Spanish half-real coin. Now, this is interesting because this is another case where Mo Hartley was talking about archaeology. This coin was found in the kiln, so it tells us three things. First, it gives us an end point. We know in that section of the kiln it wasn't made before 1773 because of the 1774 coin. Second of all, it's a Paris coin. And third, it shows some Ware. Now, in the beginning, I said that Quakers did not believe in ornamentation, decoration. So this wasn't the Quakers. They did not believe in this at that time period. But African Americans did wear Paris coins like this. So it could be it could be George Newby. It could have been somebody earlier. We have no idea who it could be, But it is interesting because it brings up an interesting idea there. Now, there's two types of furniture used at the William Dennis site. You don't see any of the little three-point stilts, trivet stilts like you see at other areas. You see these setter tiles on the left. They're flat. You can see actually the rim stuck to this one here. And then they had these finger grooves. They would take these on the lower and just rub their fingers through them. And they look like roof tiles, but they're not. We've never found one that could, we don't know if that's a holdover from Pennsylvania or something where they actually did make roof tiles, or if they just decided that the plates would release better, as with the problem in the top one there. What we do also see is a lot of saugers like this, broken sauger fragments. And you can tell by all these they're vitrified where they've been used over and over again. Now, what I like being a potter, this actually fascinates me. I call it playful decorating at the Dennis Potteries. William Dennis and his son were both potters, and they had both of them between 1791 and 1822, there were 15 children they had. So with 15 children, you're going to have probably items like this occurring. But what's interesting here is not all potters would have went ahead and fired this. Believe it or not, there are some potters that are crotchety. Isn't that right, Mary? But seriously, in some shops, they would not have fired these. So it's interesting. That gives you a little bit of an aspect on the potter himself that he would go ahead and fire these pieces. Let me go back on this piece. he probably wasn't real happy with this piece here, because if you notice these marks right here, they're made with a real sharp wood gouge. So when you got somebody's furniture gouge using it to decorate clay, that's probably not a good idea. Now, next family of potters, Quaker potters, the Dicks family. The Dicks family, three-family tradition established potteries in southern Guilford County to start with in the 1700s. We know that Cornelius Dicks was there by 1850 from historical accounts. Cornelius then moved from southern Guilford here into northern Randolph, close to Marlborough Meeting, around 1850, and established another pottery. And his son, Nathan, set up a pottery later nearby. Also, there was Peter Dicks, who come out of southern Guilford, and he established a pottery in the Salem area, New Salem, very close to the Dicks, to the William Dennis site, but we have not found that. The only site that we have found of the Dicks family is Nathan Dicks. And we did do an interview in 1990 and talked to Nettie Dicks Lamb, and Nettie said, Grandpa made it for years because I heard Dad tell about getting in a wagon and taking it plumb down to Fayetteville and selling it. You know, when they had that funny road, you know. She's talking about the plank road, 1850s to 1860. Now, if you look, this interview was done in 1990, and look at when her grandfather was born. 182 years prior, her grandfather. And we thought, surely that's not possible. But he had his son late in life, and then his son had Nettie late in life, and it did work out like that. So, also, we might add here, Nettie was a little bit vain with her age here. She was actually 92 when we did so a little vanity showed through there. Now, Cornelius Dicks' son, born in 1855, made these pieces here. And what's interesting about this, there are a lot of, for you collectors, there are a lot of these pieces out in the Piedmont of North Carolina, you see. And originally, they were thought to be older than what they were. This piece right here is a really nice piece because it's got everything you would want on it. It has who made it, Nathan Bales Dicks, where he made it, New Market, NC, and the dates on the other side's 1890. So Nathan was continuing this tradition right on up until the 20th century. In fact, he goes to 1910 making earthenware, as Mose talked about here in Salem. And for the collectors here, there is identifiers on his pottery. He did this elongated handle terminus here. You see here where he'd actually take the finger and rake it down. And also, along with this is this squiggle and then this solid incised line. Pretty heavy.
How is the pieces that are on our right, have those been documented through digs that those pieces were made at this site?
I think they are. Now, they have been in comparison with the sherds from the Nathan Dicks site. Now, what's interesting about that, too, is, see, it could be Cornelius, since he learned from his father, so there could be a little earlier age there, back to 1850. But yes, we've compared, we know where the Dicks site is, it's there north of New Market. And actually with these pieces here, we compared sherds and they match exactly the paste, the glaze, and everything. He used an unusual glaze, a little bit later style of lead glaze that you can tell almost immediately when you see it.
Because it's always been thought those pieces were made 1850 or thereabouts, maybe before.
Right. Well, this tradition continued. In fact, we found at the Nathan Dicks site these rim profiles like this with the squiggles.
So there's a possibility that Nathan's father that made this.
Yeah, Nathan's father could have made them, yes. Because we hadn't found his site, but it's close by. I think we about found it here now. It'll be interesting to see. That's a good question. I would say yes. I would say, if he was going to date these pieces, I would say 1850 to 1910, because that's what I'm going to talk about here on this next slide. Nathan, in the 1900 census, he lists his occupation on the census as potter, fireproof ware. Now, he made a distinction here because at this time, you talk about 1900, J.M. Hayes, who lived about 3 miles east, was turning out a bunch of salt glazed ware. So this is actually almost an advertisement, is what he's got here. He's saying he's making fireproof ware that you can still cook with, whereas stoneware doesn't hold up good with direct heat. There's also another mention of this in Guilford County of the Hocketts making fireproof ware and how it made the best, that's in the 2010 article we wrote, where it made the best sweet potato pies. So we know Nathan continued to make pottery up until about 1910 because we've had some taped accounts of individuals remembering digging clay in their yard. Also, one woman remembered riding by in a buggy, and the fact that when he had his pottery for sale, he put it on his front porch and he had slatted blinds. He would raise his blinds so everybody knew he had his pottery for sale. Now, this is an example of Nathan's fireproof ware here, which is just a wonderful piece. It's made to resemble a frying pan. It's got the huge bulbous handle. The first time we ever seen this, when the person brought it by, we thought it was made in Romania or somewhere, you know.
How large is that?
It's about 12 inches across, just without the handle. So it's pretty good sized piece. It's actually the same size as a cast iron frying pan, exactly. It looks, the body itself, except for the handle, is made exactly like a cast iron frying pan. Now, Nathan had a sister, Mary Dicks Davis. She married a Davis. She made the clay smoking pipes for Cornelius, her father. And when Cornelius died, she didn't have any way of firing her pipes. So what she did was she started using her wood-burning cook stove. And this is really good because this is innovative, what she did. And she continued to sell these pipes up until about the time of her death. You see several up in that area. And what's nice about them is they got a good rating from tobacco smokers because they weren't fired hard. And they were like a meerschaum when you smoked them. So they actually were really, really good for the product. And what's funny about these, now this is what's strange about it, if you dug these up and didn't know any better, you would think almost they look like Colonial ware or something like that because they're so under-fired. Now, the next group of potters, the Hockett family, they changed their name about 1850, around that time period. They started out on the Randolph-Guilford County line, and some also started out in southwestern Guilford County. Malin Hockett had a site right about in the center of High Point. The earliest record we have of anything happening up around the Hocketts is this from the Journal of William Hockett, 1878. It says, John Hockett was born the 16th day of the 2nd month, 1771, and died about the 5th month, 1772, by getting badly burned at the clay oven on coals pulled out. Well, when we've done research up in this area, people still refer to kilns as clay ovens. It's interesting. When we went up the area asking about kilns, had anybody seen any kilns, they would say, no, and then we'd talk a little longer and they'd say, but there's a clay oven. So it's interesting, the vernacular. And when you're firing a wood kiln, at the end of it, a lot of times you'll rake the coals out, and during the firing, because you get such a volume of coals, you'll have to pull them out like this. So evidently that's what happened. That's a terrible tragedy. Now this is the earliest plate that we've come across that's attributed to the Hockett family. And if you notice, the design is similar to the Moravian plates you see downstairs. But on these, they're wire trimmed on the back. They're cut off with a wire. And the Moravian plates aren't cut off like that, the ones you see. Also, this one says, made from clay off the Henry Clay Gregeson farm. And Henry Clay Gregeson's farm was actually at or part of the original William Hockett land grant tract. Now here we have William Hockett III. We definitely know he was a potter because he made this piece here. It's not signed, but it came down through the family, and they were sure that he made this piece. He made it for his son Hymelius. It's dated 1828, and it's made kind of like a little peaked, if you see it's got a little peaked apron on it, where they made it like almost like a little blanket chest. It's not big at all. It's about 4 inches. But it's dated 1828. It's slab built, which is unusual. You don't see that much in North Carolina. But where you do see this slab built furniture, if you'll think in Staffordshire, if some of you remember cradles, seeing the cradles from Staffordshire that they did. And they also did other types of little chests out of clay, out of slab building like this. So this is interesting because we're talking about English potters here, so they might have seen something like that. Or the top of this piece was actually turned on a wheel, and they cut it rectangular and then did the little slab built inset on the bottom there, right here. I always liked William Hockett's picture because he looks kind of like he's out of a Tennyson novel. He's got a nice stoic look there. Now, William's granddaughter decorated this bottle. William made this bottle, and his granddaughter decorated it. And then her father, Hymelius Hockett, who was also a potter, he kept coffee beans in this. It's still in the family, and if you take the corncob stopper out, it still smelled like coffee beans, which that's interesting. Now, that's interesting when you think of a bottle that they used it for storing coffee beans. So this is another use you see for a bottle. And it makes sense in a way because it's easy to seal. With coffee beans, you'd want them to stay fresh. But it's something you just don't think about, you know. Now, Hymelius Hockett, he was a stoic-looking individual. He was actually a brilliant person. He was an educator, a minister, furniture maker, potter, very staunch Quaker. These two pieces here are either attributed. Now, this at the top, this colander in Randolph County, they call them persimmon strainers, is attributed to either him or his brother Milton. He had a brother, Milton, who also made pieces of pottery like this. The grease lamp at the bottom has been attributed to him, too. Now, later, Hymelius, they started doing a little salt glazed ware after 1860s. Hymelius was, as I said, he was a staunch Quaker, so he was a pacifist. He didn't believe in the war. He didn't believe in slavery. So when the Civil War broke out, he got into real trouble. He was drafted and he refused to fight. So this is just a great letter. It's what historians love to find because it has everything you could ever want on it. It was a letter written to Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, to get Hymelius Hockett out of service. Now, this being the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, I don't know if a lot of you know this. Some of you will. You could pay $500 and be exempt from the Civil War. It's that easy. If you had $500, you could buy your way out. And they would work these Quakers like this because they knew they wasn't going to fight, so it was an easy source of money. And eventually, the Quaker meeting did pay for Hymelius and his brother to get out. In the meantime, they sentenced him to 6 months hard labor and put a ball and chain on him. But here we have, in this letter, get back to what I'm talking about here. One of the co-signers here on this letter is the potter Henry Watkins. Now, because during the Civil War, there was a shortage of paper, this is actually an account ledger page. And on the back is an order, 1842, for earthenware. 5 dishes at 10 cents a piece, 1 pan, 6.5 cents. Now, I notice out there at the end, their math isn't quite right because it come out at I see 66, but they might have carried something over from another page. Now, we went in 1990, we also did our interview with Everett Cox, and this is where you need to pay attention to what people are saying, no matter how crazy it sounds. Everett, he was 94 at the time, and he was in care center. He said, now there was another crockery over there. They cured it. They had a rock wall they cured it in right across the branch. I believe they called that the David Hockett place. So that sounds, you know, you think, a rock wall, what is he talking about? Well, here's the rock wall. It does look like a rock wall from the back, actually. It's the David Hockett kiln. And David used it from about 1870 to 1910 to fire earthenware and these extruded drain tile, these horseshoe-type drain tile. Now, there is fragments of these around the kiln that we did find. We found one piece of slip decorated ware, too, in the branch close by. What's interesting about this kiln and the Dennis kiln is the footprints are very similar. Square kiln's unusual, have a square footprint, 10 by 10. The Hockett kiln, he used a talcious schist rock lining instead of brick. It's what local people in Randolph County call dirt rock. We've talked to 3 individuals that could remember the kiln, how it looked when it was standing, and all 3 talked about this piece up on top. They said they had problems with the draft. And one person described it as a terracotta pipe, and the other 2 said it was a metal pipe up on top. But it was front loading, and I think it's probably the way maybe the Dennis, Dennis site's going to look, the kiln site there probably. And since this time, in the last week, Eleanor and I found yet another one of these square kilns that belonged to William Dennis's son Thomas. So that's 3 now. Now, Henry Watkins, Henry grew up in New Salem, probably learned from either the Dicks family or the Dennis family. And in 1837, when Peter Dicks decided to move out of New Salem, Henry moved to southern Guilford County, so that suggests that he might have been working somehow with Peter Dicks in the business. Anyhow, he moved to southern Guilford County, and then by 1860 he was back over in northern Randolph County, and he's listed as a miller, but he was living beside the Hocketts, the pottery makers. So probably he was over there making pottery too. These are 4 pieces attributed to the Henry Watkins pottery. We just found this one recently. This is in Springfield Monthly Meeting, and it came, all these pieces. Now this is interesting because we haven't talked much about consumers, so we're going to get around to that here at the end. All 4 of these Watkins pieces, or that's attributed to him, came out of the same house. It was the Solomon Frazier house that's at New Market Township, northern Randolph County. Now, this house has since been torn down and moved, but it was built in the 1790s. And we know that Solomon Frazier was married to Hannah Blair, but his second wife was Catharine Cox Frazier. And I love her photo because she's the epitome of a Quaker woman that you think of. And Catherine's born in 1835, died in 1919. This photo here is probably taken about 1910, maybe a little later than that. So what's interesting about Catherine is, we talk about these Quakers, and if any of you have seen the 2010 Ceramics in America, you'll see these family tree charts that just all over the board with these Quakers interrelated. And even in your packet, there's 37 potters, a list of the 37 potters. I will guarantee that if you was to take one of those potters and do a family tree, you'll see that they'll be interrelated to 5 others. It's just all around. And we can use Catherine. I just took Catherine at random because we can use her as an example of this. Catharine Cox. Okay, let's talk about Catherine. Catherine lived in the center of the Hockett tradition. To her southeast was David Franklin Hockett, the potter. To her west was Henry Watkins, the potter. To her north lived Cornelius Dicks and Milton Hockett, potters. And to the east was Hymelius Hockett. So she was basically surrounded by potters. And if you'll see in the same document again, her brother Isaiah Cox was imprisoned with Hymelius Hockett, and her other brother was a co-signer along with Henry Watkins. So, if we run a family tree on her, Catharine Cox was the aunt of David Franklin Hockett. She was the second cousin once removed of Samuel Vestal Barker. She was second cousin once removed of the potter Messer Amos Vestal. She was the third cousin of the potter Tilghman Vestal. She was the third cousin once removed of his wife, the potter Hymelius Hockett. She was the third cousin twice removed of Rachel Hockett. First cousin twice removed of Charles Davis. Second cousin once removed of Hannah Davis. Now these, I don't know if you recognize these two names, but they are, Charles Davis's wife, Hannah, was the original owner of the Hannah dish, which is the last, this was the last article, about the last article in Ceramics in America, where we talk about this Hannah dish that was, if you named your daughter Hannah, this plate was passed down, this dish was passed down. And it went through 4 generations before somebody didn't name her child Hannah. Now, we have a dog we named Hannah, but I don't think we're going to get the plate. And I'm going to leave it right. What's that? Johanna. Johanna, there you go. That's it. Close enough. And we'll leave it right there at the end of my talk. Are there any questions from anybody?
Questions for Hal?
Who was the potter in Philadelphia that Kirby worked with?
Jesse Kersey, John Thompson.
John Thompson?
John Thompson. Mm-hmm.
And the plate that you showed, is that yellow sponging?
It's marbling. It's actually marbling where they took 2 colors and marbled them together. Michelle showed that yesterday, how they did that. In fact, is this piece right here. I'll pick it up. Like this, where it's marbled in the center. Can you see that? But anyway, they would drape mold it over either a wooden or a plaster bat to do.
Where's that plate now?
The plate in Philadelphia, it's in the National Park Service has it. From Franklin Court. It was found in Franklin Court, so it's on display up there. Any other questions?
Where is that letter to Jefferson Davis?
It's in the Guilford College Historical Collection, Friends Historical Collection. They have they're probably one of the most underrated places because they have wonderful information like that. They have a wealth of information on Tilghman Vestal that we used. Anything else? Any other questions?
Hal, thank you very much.
Thank you.